morning and welcome to Rising. We've got a very special edition of our show today because there's three of us, and that's going to be fun.
Company.
We used to do that a lot more often, and we were having a meeting the other day with the production team, and I'm like, why don't we try three people again? It's been a while. And then they were like, okay, you want to come in on Friday? I'm like, damn, you tricked me. Okay, fine.
Cell phone.
So here we are, and we're going to get to our top story. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. New York City Mayor Eric Adams surrendered himself to the feds this morning ahead of his arraignment in federal court as he faces 5 counts of federal corruption charges. Prosecutors say that starting in 2014, Adams sought and accepted, quote, improper valuable benefits like luxury international travel from wealthy foreigners, including at least one Turkish government official seeking to influence him. Adams allegedly received free hotel rooms, meals, and entertainment while in Turkey, and has also sought over $100,000 in travel benefits dating back to 2016. Now, at times, Adams would pay a nominal sum to make it appear like he had covered the full costs of travel arrangements. He would direct those around him to create a fake paper trail. Plus, Adams returned favors to Turkish officials, according to the indictment. For instance, Adams was requested to help open the Turkish consular skyscraper without a proper fire inspection, to which Adams complied. Now, by 2018, not only was Adams accepting, but seeking illegal campaign contributions to his mayoral campaign. Again, this is according to the indictment. His gains were then compounded by New York City's small dollar donation matching program. In total, Adams' 2021 mayoral campaign allegedly illegally received more than $10 million in public funds. Now, it didn't end there, though. Even after Adams was inaugurated as mayor, he began planning to solicit additional illegal contributions and granting requests. The 5 counts he faces includes conspiracy to commit wire fraud, solicitation of a contribution by a foreign national, and bribery. The U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York said, quote, "These are bright red lines, and we allege that the mayor crossed them again and again for years." He faces up to 45 years in prison. Now, Mayor Adams wrote on X, quote, "You have now heard the news about today's indictment. Let me be clear, I know I've done nothing wrong, and I am committed to continuing to fight on behalf of New Yorkers as your mayor. From here, my attorneys will take care of the case so I can take care of this city."
Influencer Olaimi Olorin reacted to the indictment on X, writing, quote, "What is important to highlight is that Eric Adams was stealing millions of public dollars, getting kickbacks, and conspiring with foreign governments while cutting funding for New Yorkers and telling us to blame the migrants. A liar, a thief, a bigot, and a hypocrite." Dem strategist Liz Smith reacted to the news that Cuomo, Andrew Cuomo that is, could be gearing up for a mayoral run, writing, quote, "Or, hear me out, as a former Cuomo person, maybe we shouldn't go from a scandal-scarred mayor who may have to resign in disgrace to a scandal-scarred governor who did have to resign in disgrace. What's in New York's DNA tells us we need to just settle for extremely flawed options."
Meanwhile, some on the right have suggested they knew this was coming. Take a listen to former President Donald Trump.
I will say this. I watched about a year ago when he talked about how the illegal migrants are hurting our city and the federal government should pay us and we shouldn't have to take them. And I said, you know what? He'll be indicted within a year. And I was exactly right, because that's what we have. We have people that use the Justice Department and the FBI at levels that have never been seen before.
Pershing Square CEO Bill Ackman reacted similarly, writing on X, quote, "I don't know whether Eric Adams is guilty or innocent. He does, however, deserve the presumption of innocence. I do know that Eric loudly spoke the truth on the migrant problem in New York City and what the consequences would be for New Yorkers and the country. Doing so required bravery, as sharing these views publicly as a Democratic mayor did not win him any friends in the party or with the Biden-Harris administration. Having witnessed the weaponization of our country's prosecutorial resources, sadly, I have to say I am much more skeptical when indictments are announced against someone whose views are not welcomed by the party in charge."
So this is very interesting because I am seeing it right now. The people defending Eric Adams are mostly on the right, and I don't think this is a good idea, frankly. He seems to be, he of course deserves, benefit of due process and all that. But what they've accused him of seems pretty solid to me, and I don't know, just because, yes, the federal government or the Justice Department is sometimes weaponized unfairly, I agree with that. And there is a, selectivity in who gets prosecuted and what gets treated as a serious offense. But I don't know that they're just going after him because of his vaguely anti-migrants comments. What do you think?
I don't buy that either. I mean, yes, he did criticize party leadership for failing to take the crisis seriously.
Like weekly, but he didn't do anything about it.
Right, exactly. I mean, he didn't address the migrant crisis himself. He just basically blamed the feds. But then also, according to the timeline of the investigation and the indictment, he was already involved in this shady behavior well before he became mayor of New York City. So the timeline just suggests that they were already looking into him before he ever made any comments about migrants and the so-called crisis in New York City after he got like 10,000 of them.
It has nothing to do with the migrants. I mean, the right wing is just looking for opportunities to talk about things. But Bill Ackman, for instance, while he might be a New York Republican or lean more conservative, and Eric Adams, let's remember, was a Republican and was a police lieutenant, and he does sway far more right than most Democrats probably would want. With that being said, he was Brooklyn Borough president, and he does have a group of supporters who've been with him in his career, you know, from the beginning, that came out on stage yesterday, and he said that they backed him and they got to wait it out, and you know the process will show things. What's different about this situation as opposed to when Eliot Spitzer had to step down, or when Governor Cuomo had to step down, or when other mayors have been investigated, because we have had several investigations, is that he was indicted while he was in office, and much of that indictment had to do with his previous role as Brooklyn Borough president, and the matching funds system that New York uniquely has, where if you are able to raise a certain amount of money in the city, under a certain amount of money, you can get, it wasn't this rule at the time, so I don't want to get too confusing, but today it's 8 to 1. So you'll get $8 for every dollar you raise in the city. It's actually something that levels the playing field, and if you do it right, especially in a citywide race over many months, you can totally get those matching funds legally and easily. And that's why I think this is such a wild story, that they had to come up with some sort of scheme to get Turkish dollars into small dollar donations with individuals, fake individuals in New York, so he could get the $10 million.
Well, the funniest part of it to me is the receipts, where they'll be like, well, charge me, you have to charge me something for this plane flight, and they'll be like, okay, $50. And then the person in the text is like, well, that looks suspicious, and they're like, okay, $1,000. Like, it's the laziest kind of corruption scandal possibly. And then of course I love the detail where this is always the #1 goal of like Turkish influencers and lobbyists, people, this is true, is to don't say anything about the Armenian genocide.
Yes.
They asked him, maybe just let Armenian Genocide Awareness Day pass by unacknowledged this year. It's the #1 demand request of Turkish officials, which is horrible. But
it drives me crazy because, you know, he, as Brooklyn Borough president, he also I'm Greek American, okay, so we have very strong feelings about Erdogan, who threatened to take over the island my family's from, because he's right next to Turkey in the Mediterranean. So Erdogan is in New York this week, meeting with the Greek prime minister, because it's UN week in New York, and the building that's in contention is right across from the UN, and it has this giant flag of Turkey on it, and this was a building that should not have been approved. And so they did call in their favors, and they said that in writing, which I understand that some lawmakers do this in America, and it's really stupid, but it is a foreign concept, literally a foreign concept, for foreign governments to understand the rules of our system. And so part of the other issue is that Eric Adams had a circle around him of very young people dealing with the finance side, which is really not smart because the campaign finance board's rules are so strict. So those investigations happen internally in the CFB much further, and then they send it to the DOJ, or then send it to the FBI, or they start working simultaneously. So, you know, it was just sloppy on his part too. Like, if you're gonna go bribery, you know, don't be so dumb.
And
don't
there's
hire a 20-year-old.
And it reminds me of George Santos, who also had a very willing to go along with all of his schemes treasurer on his campaign. But there's a page in the indictment where it talks about one of these staffers being approached by someone who wanted to bribe Eric Adams. And he's like, well, I don't know, he probably doesn't want to do that. And then he goes to talk to Eric Adams, and he's like, yeah, man, get the money. And so the guy goes back, and he's like, yep, Eric Adams is totally cool with bribery, turns out. Yeah, it's such a mess. And I do think it's kind of an interesting parallel, by the way, that on the migrant issue, just to go back to that for a second, he didn't ask for a change in policy. He just wanted more money. Like, this is a guy who's totally driven by money.
Yep, money, fame, power, etc. That's what seems to
New York.
become in New York. I will be interested to see if Andrew Cuomo genuinely makes another run for it.
I've gotten calls from people. He openly says that he would rather be governor, yeah, shocker, than mayor. But
rather be president.
In a very low turnout election, well, that's how we would get there. In a very low turnout election, because we have abysmal turnout in New York, and ranked choice voting, which is a new system that we have, there's actually a pathway for him because, you know, he just has to get a certain number of the votes, and he has a lot of money. We don't know if it could be transferred to city-wide campaigns, probably not.
Incredible. Incredible. We'll be back with more Rising right after this. Stay tuned.
All right, we are actually now to our favorite part of the show because Nomiki and I don't have to do anything. And the adult in the room gets to tell us all what's what. Robby, what's on your radar?
Thank you very much. I'm glad you asked. This week, President Joe Biden finally sat down for a grueling interview about the rapidly escalating tensions in the Middle East, the security failures that have resulted in multiple assassination attempts against his rival, former President Donald Trump, and whether he is still cognitively fit to serve out the rest of his term. Just kidding. In reality, he made an appearance Wednesday on The View alongside his personal cheering squad, the show's hosts. Now, Whoopi Goldberg was particularly effusive in her praise for the president, describing her support for him as ride or die. Joy Behar joked with him about age being just a number. They are both 81, and then lovingly nuzzled his shoulder. Aw. The ladies did ask him about his decision to exit the presidential race, which drew this reply.
And look, I never fully believed the assertions that somehow there was this overwhelming reluctance of my running again. I didn't sense that. And although the polling, as I said, Biden's polling was different, the fact of the matter is my polling was about, we're always within range of beating this guy.
Let me transcribe that for you in case it was just a little bit hard to understand what he was saying. He said, although the Biden polling was different, my polling was always within range of beating this guy. So that was the most coherent part of the answer. By the way, it's also not at all accurate. Over the course of 2024, Biden's polling steadily worsened against Trump. In the immediate aftermath of his disastrous June debate performance, Biden had dropped to 6 points behind Trump in national polling. But even before the dreaded debate, the polls showed Trump pulling away from Biden. As far back as November 2023, almost a year ago, some polls showed Trump edging out Biden in the key swing states. Importantly, these polls also showed Biden underperforming Trump relative to other Democrats, including, for the first time at that point, Vice President Kamala Harris, who had always polled worse than Biden until then. Biden's favorability ratings had also collapsed since the 2022 midterms. A year ago, maybe, Biden could credibly claim that polls showed him within range of Donald Trump, given significant uncertainties. But by the time Biden's campaign was hurtling toward its ignoble end, this was just no longer true. Biden was going to lose. Later during the conversation on The View, Goldberg remarked that while she supported the outcome, she did not approve of the messy, public manner in which Democratic elites ejected Biden. I don't either. But the messy exit was made necessary because of Biden's own actions, his stubborn refusal to admit that he had no path to re-election. The polls don't lie. He's misleading you about what they said. Now, it's fine for the ladies of The View to treat the president with kindness and respect. But as with the ABC presidential debate between Trump and Harris, it's very telling the prominent Democrats can get away much more easily with statements that are simply untrue. And indeed, many Democrats and supporters of Kamala Harris are in deep denial about her chances in November. She could very well win, but there's an entire cadre of anti-Trump Twitter personalities who are so assured of Trump's defeat that they actually disparage mainstream media for being, get this, too tough on Kamala Harris. I call them Blue Anon because they often sound just as conspiratorial as anyone on the far right. Here's a great example of what I'm talking about. Now, I'm frequently critical personally of the New York Times. You know this, longtime viewers. Though I'm also grateful that its editors have let me written for the opinion section on occasion. Many progressive Democrats, however, are also critical of the Times. They tend to take the insane position that the paper is too pro-Trump. Really, I kid you not. Consider this post from left-leaning journalist Dan Frumkin, who accuses the Times of, quote, boosting Trump's candidacy by refusing to report that Harris is, quote, destroying Trump in the electoral race. He thinks that's the state of the race. Frumkin cites as evidence this column by Drew Magary, an opinion writer for the San Francisco Chronicle and an avowed anti-Trumper. Now, Magary slams the Times for describing the race between Trump and Harris as deadlocked, when actually, according to him, Harris is way ahead, destroying Trump. Magary says Harris is way ahead because Trump is losing in Pennsylvania, a state he needs to win, by 4 points. Okay, let's fact check that. To be sure, there are polls that show Harris up by as many as 5 points in Pennsylvania, but many other polls have her leading by just 1 or 2 points. Nate Silver's average puts Harris 1.5 points, 1.5 points, above Trump in the state. Okay, here's the real problem. I want to be very clear about this. During the run-up to the 2020 election, the polls showed Biden beating Trump by 4, 5, or 6 points in the state of Pennsylvania, according to CNN. We've got it up on screen. Now, when the votes were tallied, Biden did win the state, but it was by 1.17%. In other words, if the polling error in Democrats' favor is as egregious in this cycle as it was in 2020, Trump will win the state and probably the presidency. Now, it's certainly possible the polls are more accurate this time around, sure, but that's why the presidential race is currently best described as a toss-up. Neither candidate is destroying the other. Maybe Drew Magary, who infamously predicted that Trump was going to get his ass kicked in the 2016 election, should just stick to writing about sports. But this is the level of delusion, not just of Biden-Harris surrogates on social media and in progressive circles, but of, occasionally, Joe Biden himself. And so this is, I thought, helpful to go back and look at the polling here. Because, yes, I see that, according to the most recent polling, Kamala Harris is up a little bit in several of the swing states, including Pennsylvania. But Biden, it's crazy. If you look at the polling, Biden versus Trump, week before the election, shows Biden winning Pennsylvania by 6 points. And he won it by 1 point. So I don't know. I would not be confident that Kamala Harris is destroying Trump. Isn't that insane?
I think it's insane, and I think the Kamala Harris campaign understands it's insane to be that confident. We've been there before, guys.
Yeah.
She does have the energy, though, and so I do think there's a difference in that. While technically everything's within the margin of error, even Trump versus Biden, a few months ago was within the margin of error, so maybe that's generally what he was saying. But it was clear that the enthusiasm was the issue. The enthusiasm gap is a problem, and pretty much any presidential candidate, right or left, if you have the enthusiasm, you're most likely going to see better results on Election Day. It's always close. We know that every single year.
Amber, you and I complain a lot about the mainstream media, the New York Times, for anti-conservative bias, those kinds of things. But it's real. There's a segment of the internet out there on social media, on Twitter, or maybe they're on Blue Sky now, or wherever, I don't know, long COVID patients go or something, to say that the mainstream media is biased in favor of Trump and against Kamala Harris and Joe Biden.
Yeah.
That is a fervent belief.
It's incredible. So they basically go back to 2016, where they claim that the media was responsible for platforming Trump too much, for giving him too much attention on cable news and broadcast news channels, and therefore that's why he won, which is the complete, of course, misunderstanding of why Trump was able to capture his base in the way that he was. It's not because he was covered on Morning Joe. And so then you actually saw media correct on this misconception, where places like CNN and MSNBC would no longer cover Trump rallies live. They would do live fact-checking during some of his public appearances, which they don't do for pretty much any other public official. And now, even still, you have these loonies on the internet claiming that the mainstream media is biased towards Trump. It's obviously patently ridiculous. On the poll question, if I were the Trump campaign, one trend that I would be concerned about is that Kamala has closed the gap quite significantly on the issues. So, for example, Trump was up double digits against Biden on the economy and immigration. He's only up by about 9 or 10 points on Kamala Harris on those two issues. That's obviously a pretty significant closing of that margin. And the issues are what voters are thinking about when they go to the polls. So he has to find some way to regain that lead that he had on Biden on those top maybe 4 or 5 issues for voters.
That's a good point. We'll be back with more Rising right after this.
Popular singer Chappell Roan was skewered online by her Gen Z fan base for not endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris. The singer told The Guardian, quote, "I don't feel pressured to endorse someone. There's problems on both sides. I encourage people to use your critical thinking skills, use your vote, vote small, vote for what's going on in your city." And after her fan base freaked out, Chappell Roan posted this video. Let's watch.
I just woke up, and to like people just skewing it even more, endorsing and voting are completely different. I don't agree with a lot of what is going on with like policies. Like, obviously, the policies of the right, but also some of the policies on the left. That's why I can't endorse. That's why I can't like put my entire name and my entire project behind one. Because there is no way I can stand behind some of the left's completely transphobic and completely genocidal views. So yeah, there are huge problems on both. You know what is right and wrong, and so do I. F Trump for real, but some of the that has gone down in the Democratic Party that has failed people like me and you. And more so, Palestine. And more so, every marginalized community in the world. So no, I'm not gonna settle for what the options that are in front of me. And you're not gonna make me feel bad for that. So yeah,
Roan went on to say she'd be voting for Kamala Harris, but would not settle with what is being offered.
I mean, sounds like I don't really agree with Chappell Roan's broader politics if her criticism of the left is that they're not far left enough. But I appreciate her not wanting to, cynically force her fans to fit into some Kamala Harris box the way so many other celebrities are. I agree that you shouldn't settle for the lesser of two evils. I'm a third-party voter, so I appreciate that she's expressing that sentiment, and I think that's fine.
I think there's a couple things happening here. She has valid criticisms of the Democratic Party. I could do that all day long. And she's voting Kamala Harris, as I am too. With that being said, she has been very vocal about jumping into the limelight, that fame is like going through puberty, and it shows. She's hurting, she's talked about depression, and the social media response for every move that you make. I mean, she could just make one little move, right, in her performance or talk about one person, but in a presidential election in particular, there is, unfortunately, some sort of PR responsibility with your words that in this ecosystem we live in today, whether it's her agents and managers and future jobs or the social media response, she's got to be a little bit more cautious because it's hazardous. It's a liability, unfortunately, to fame.
As we know, it's just so difficult being famous.
Oh yeah, her whining and moaning has been annoying. But I think this is more a story about toxic fan culture, where you have this vocal minority of stans, as they call them, who try to pressure celebrities to make these public statements that nobody really cares about. I mean, we saw what happened with the Taylor Swift endorsement. The first study that came out afterwards suggested, or the first poll that came out afterwards suggested that it actually hurt Kamala Harris. So, well, I mean, you can.
400,000 people registered to vote the next day.
That's actually not accurate. So what happened?
Okay, right-wing media. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I'll explain it for you. So what happened was the increase went 100,000 more. So there was an average of 300,000 people visiting the voter registration website on a daily basis. Up until Taylor Swift made her post on social media, it slightly increased to 400,000 and then immediately dropped back down. We don't actually know how many of those people signed up to register to vote. This is just based on website visits. And there was a poll that found that people had a more negative opinion towards Kamala Harris when they found out that Taylor Swift had endorsed her. So there's a question as to whether...
What polling? I love when Republicans throw out polls here and there, but it's like, was it those under 40? Was it those under 30?
All of them.
All of them. What poll? You can't just say generic things like that.
Okay, I'll find the poll for you then.
Find the polling. I mean, I get it's convenient, and you guys are really upset that Taylor Swift didn't endorse Donald Trump.
I don't care about that.
But it is important, and it might sway the election. It might not. I guess we'll just have
Taylor
to see.
Taylor Swift support. I mean, what's going to sway the election is rural working voters in Pennsylvania, who I don't think were sitting home waiting, to Amber's point, wondering what Taylor Swift was going to tell them to do, right? And now they're like, oh, okay, now I'm going to vote.
It's a Quinnipiac poll that was conducted between September 19th and 22. 3/4 of likely voters said that her endorsement does not make a difference, while 9% said that it makes them more enthusiastic, and 13%, which is higher than 9%, says that it makes them less enthusiastic.
Again,
I have
that's
a hard
not the
time
base.
believing it's going to swing the election.
So let me make the case really quick. That's a generic poll about likely voters. That is not who they're trying to get. The base is everything. MAGA wants their base. Kamala Harris wants her base of young people, just enough to show up, of people of color, of a whole array of young women and older women. Right? You need that base to show up, and then you want to bridge over with the Never Trumpers, et cetera. So she needs to excite young people enough or more, because it came down to 60,000 votes in 2020 between 3 swing states. So if it's 200 more in one precinct in Wisconsin, that could make a difference. If that's 200 young people that don't normally show up, again, the Quinnipiac poll is about all likely voters, including Republicans, not Kamala Harris's base. So if more people register to vote because of Taylor Swift, yeah, that could make a difference in a couple of precincts in an election. And that's great. And you guys do it too.
I mean, it's not I don't think it's a bad thing for the Democrats that Taylor Swift isn't endorsing Kamala Harris, and that Chappell Roan says she's going to vote for Kamala Harris. But the get all the celebrities on our side thing, I think the base is already fired up. I think they're motivated. I think they're energized. The question is, are this small number of genuine swing voters in this country, people who might have been Republicans but don't love Trump, or are Democrats but aren't enthusiastic about the last 4 years and are looking for working class supportive policies? I don't think these are people who are disproportionately plugged into pop culture. They're disproportionately plugged into their own economic reality and the concerns that they have, and that's who the election's going to come down to.
You need both, though. You need an excited base and the swing voters. That's the key.
I guess my point is that when Robby's talking about these swing voters, and Kamala has made an effort to try to get moderate Republicans, right? She's moderated on a lot of her positions from 2019. She has been touting the endorsements of people like Dick Cheney, and has been sending out these memos about how 250 former Republicans have endorsed Kamala Harris. So it does matter if people have a negative opinion about Taylor Swift's endorsement or any celebrity's endorsement. And it's not specifically about Taylor Swift. She's a Democrat. Everybody knows this, right? She endorsed Phil Bredesen against Marsha Blackburn in 2018. This is not new information. Anybody who's upset about Taylor Swift endorsing Kamala Harris obviously doesn't know anything about Taylor Swift. Right. That's fine. Like, I don't care who Taylor Swift endorses.
It was stupid of Donald Trump to fume about it. Like, we just got to move on, dude.
But a lot of people are averse to celebrity endorsements no matter who it is, because they don't like the idea of being lectured by an elite privileged group of people who frankly aren't feeling the economic concerns or the concerns of immigration, which are the top 2 issues for voters right now.
Yeah.
I will say, I understand the elitism argument, but let's talk about the CEOs being elite. These are artists, and I think that the right has been so aggressive about their war against artists who, a lot of them did come from humble beginnings. In fact, most came from humble beginnings. And yes, they get catapulted into celebrity, but they're still humans. They still live under the same, laws that we all live in. She's still a woman. If she wants to have an abortion in Texas, if she lives in Texas, she's not going to be able to do that.
Well, she can get on her private jet and fly anywhere else in the country.
Well, not if it's up to Donald Trump, It's going to be nowhere. But that's
why is it? Wait.
Donald Trump opposes a national federal abortion ban.
Yesterday he didn't.
Well, he said the same thing about Kamala. I don't know what she supports today.
When has Donald Trump ever supported a national abortion ban? Name one time.
Oh my God, come on right now. Point is, he flip-flops on a lot of issues. We can sit here and talk all day about flip-flopping, but in terms of celebrity or artists, yes, on one hand, okay, yeah, they're elitist. Got it. Some of them live in mansions, not all of them do. But they also should care about who their president is. Doesn't mean that strips them of citizenship. I would love for Republicans to have the same opinions about CEOs who are making 60 times what they made 20 years ago, who are making hundreds of times more than the average worker. You want to be the party of working people that take on the CEOs, take on those big companies who are
Well, that's precisely what the Trump-Vance ticket is about bringing a new populace into the Republican Party.
Why are the CEOs donating to the Republican Party?
You could say the same about, Reid Hoffman doesn't donate to the Democrats.
Oh, you found one.
George Soros.
Tim Walz was just with Alex Soros, right?
Alex Soros,
did the photo op.
He's not a CEO. Alex Soros runs a huge foundation that does human rights work all over the world. He empowers people to go out and vote. He does voters' drives. That's a Soros
I find it
foundation.
convenient that Republicans are somehow the party of big corporate donations, when in every single election, Democrats manage to outspend Republicans by a fraction of about 10 to 1. We're supposed to believe that's all just small dollar donors.
Oh, take a look at the super PACs then, because you know what you guys do? You just funnel them into super PACs so no one can track it.
Okay.
It's called dark money. Well, it's true. I mean, on
We actually just had a guest on the program last Friday who mentioned that Kamala Harris has been taking more in dark money than Donald Trump.
That's not true, by the way.
There's a lot of big money, but you would concede that there are a lot of big money supporters behind both parties.
Yes.
And there are big, Mark Cuban, one of the richest, wealthiest, is a major Kamala Harris surrogate right now. You're right, of course, that people like Bill Ackman, who are maybe previously more neutral, have gotten really behind Donald Trump. So I take your point. There's a lot of big moneyed interest, and that is a problem in our society. But this is a culture segment. I think people get annoyed by being constantly lectured to. Yeah, I'm sure by CEOs to the extent they see it. But the CEOs are mostly on, I guess, Twitter lecturing to us. I think people also get annoyed by being lectured by their celebrities, and they would. Know their celebrities have views
and have the person behind the microphone popping off about politics.
Well, some do. I mean, Hulk Hogan, everyone loved when all the.
That was at the RNC, Nomi. Come on, that's not a concert.
He still does it all the time in different.
Well, this is a lot of fun. More Rising right after this.
Macklemore was dropped from a Vegas music festival after telling a Seattle concert crowd, quote, F America, except he didn't bleep it, during his pro-Palestine benefit concert. Neon City Music Festival said Macklemore would no longer be performing because of, quote, unforeseen circumstances. Following the news, Macklemore released a lengthy statement on Instagram, writing in part, quote, sometimes I slip up and get caught in the moment. Unfortunately, the historic event in my hometown that brought thousands of people together to raise awareness and money for the people of Palestine has become overshadowed by two words. I wish I had been in a better place with my grief and anger, but the truth is I'm not okay. I haven't been. Macklemore went on to say, quote, watching a genocide unfold in front of us has been excruciating, and expressed his disappointment with the U.S. involvement before adding, I've lost endorsements, I've lost business ties, I am still here unwavering in my support for a free Palestine.
For context, Macklemore has long been a vocal supporter of Palestine throughout the war. He signed a letter accusing Israel of committing genocide. He's called for a ceasefire, and he released a protest song in support of the college protesters. I'm going to say that this is a little excessively pearl clutchy for the venue to get mad that he said that. I mean, he's a political person with a strongly held left or progressive views on the Israel-Palestine conflict. That's no secret. That was, what I'm gathering, was even the point of this concert, so that he said that. It seems like, what did they expect? Like, oh my God, they're scandalized that he said that? It seems silly to me.
They knew, I mean, you're right. They've known in advance this isn't a new thing.
Yeah.
I think what's concerning, and sometimes we forget from the conversation, is, and it hurts the Palestinian movement. He is pro-Palestine, and thank him for being so, from my opinion, as a leftist. But he's also made some very uncomfortable comments and had some uncomfortable opinions about the Holocaust. He was in Germany, where there are very strict laws regarding speech in the Holocaust, where he mimicked Nazis, and it's been pushed back against by many communities, and so that doesn't help the Palestinian cause when you have a celebrity playing.
Yeah, I think his political views are
that.
crazy. It's just like, that's what you sign up for, right? It's very silly to be mad about it afterwards.
Yeah, I tended to think it was an overreaction at first, but then I looked a little bit more into this Neon City Music Festival, and it is the first year that they're having it. And if I were one of the organizers, I'd be like, this is not what I want my inaugural event to be known for. And then it's also actually an all-ages event. So this is for families to bring their children to. There's food vendors, there's musical acts. And so the obscenity alone might be enough for you to kind of be cautious about it. But generally, I'd say, we know artists tend to be liberal.
I mean, F America is a lyric in a Green Day. So I was just at a Green Day concert. It's in the American Idiot. Right, wouldn't be surprised, like, oh my God, I can't believe they said that. It's in the song lyrics.
And they're doing it also to make a point, at least when they first wrote the lyrics about free speech. But you're right, like, more child-friendly singers, someone who they can stay on script, because this isn't a secret. When you're a celebrity and an artist, and you're not to be somebody who can be predictable, I guess,
right.
When you go up, that's a risk to a business. And do I agree with it? No, personally I don't. I also think
I didn't know about his Holocaust stuff. I'm looking that up right now.
Yeah, it's not a fun thing to look at. Not your greatest messenger if you want to be part of the pro-Palestinian cause.
Yeah, I also didn't know that he was still relevant. I mean, I don't remember the last time he had a song on radio, but I guess maybe with this being the first year of this festival, his rate was a little bit cheaper than some of the other acts they could have got into books.
What's he known for? Candy?
Thrift shop.
Thrift shop.
Yeah.
I went to his concert like 10 years ago.
Yeah, 10 years ago.
2013, I think. Yeah.
I think I went 10 years without going to any concert whatsoever. I don't see a lot of music lives, but I recently went to this Green Day,
That's cool.
like some 20th anniversary of the American Idiot album.
Oh gosh.
I think it's 30th. I think it's 30th.
No, it's
Stop.
20.
No, it's 20,
It
'cause
came out in the early aughts.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I just feel
because
very
I
old
would
now.
listen to that on the bus to school. But yeah,
It was an amazing concert. They did every song from that album.
just back to back, straight through.
Yes, including like 2 of the songs are 8 minutes
Yeah.
long. That guy has Billy Armstrong, I think is the lead singer's name.
Billy Joe Armstrong.
His voice, it is amazing. I get hoarse after doing this show every day, and he just screamed his head off for like he did every song on the album. It was incredible.
Did you
I
see
really
he
liked
showed
it.
up on the New York City subway and they started playing on the subway?
That's so cool.
That
Also,
never the days
the
I'm
concert
on.
was the introductory act was another favorite band of mine from much further back, Smashing Pumpkins.
Oh, yeah.
Which my dad loved, and I grew up listening to that music when I was a little kid. So it was a great concert.
I'm a big 90s grunge fan.
Yes, same. That's my comfort music.
Yeah,
Even though it's like the least aesthetically pleasant, pleasing music, like deep, really grisly voices.
Some Eddie Vedder, like,
It just puts me, it's like I'm transported back to like a sandbox as a child, and blasting on the porch or something. It really takes me back.
Oh, maybe that's a secret to getting a baby to stop crying.
Yeah, try out some grunge rock from the early 90s. All right, I think we've said all we need to say about this. More Rising in just a minute.
Members of the Daughters of the American Revolution are fighting back against allowing transgender women into the historic, patriotic, nonprofit, non-political, volunteer women's organization.
Conservative commentator Michael Knowles agrees and wrote on X this week, quote, "Happily, members are channeling the rebellious spirit of their forebears and fighting back." Joining us now to discuss is host of the Michael Knowles Show, Michael Knowles. Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you all. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So let's set up this story a little bit. My understanding is that the Daughters of the American Revolution have been sort of toying with the idea of allowing transgender participants for the past year or so. But you reported this week on a set of internal documents where they've basically just done this without the consent of their membership. Is that right?
Yes, and a lot of the members are rather miffed about this, and I think with good reason, because, it's right there in the name. The Daughters of the American Revolution is a group that is exclusively for women. There's another group called the Sons of the American Revolution, which I actually know something about because my grandpa was the president of his chapter of SAR. My father joined. Whenever I finish the paperwork, I can join the Sons of the American Revolution. So there's a place for men who want to join this genealogical group. But then, of course, it's a genealogical group. So the organization is grounded in genetics, making it all the more ironic that the leadership of DAR now wants to ignore genetics and biology in the bylaws and in the membership. So there are a number of members who reached out and asked for help because they feel that this is being railroaded by a distant and oppressive leadership. So the ladies in the club, the women of the DAR, are channeling the rebellious spirit of their ancestors and fighting back. And I hope as this story has become more widely known, I think the leadership is going to be forced to back down because I think their position is just absurd.
Who pushed the leadership to make this choice? Is there pressure from outside woke actors, DEI considerations, those kinds of things?
There is pressure from individuals who are activists. In fact, there's a woman I interviewed on my own YouTube channel who describes herself as a trans widow. She's a woman whose husband came to identify as a woman and blew up the whole family. And she pointed out that her husband has actually joined DAR. So there are a lot of activists pushing it, and I think the leadership has feared the woke mob. So they've cited anti-discrimination law, which now has been redefined in recent years thanks to liberal justices on the court, plus Justice Gorsuch, to include gender identity. Now, of course, DAR is a private membership organization. However, I think they're just a little bit nervous of wokeness and of being canceled. And also, there's something actually rather charming about some of these women being a little bit traditional and demure and not wanting an aggressive political fight, though the members are pushing back. And I think it's all the more reason that men in this case need to stand up and say, no, women are entitled to their own spaces. They're entitled to their own private clubs. They're entitled to their own sports teams. They're entitled to their own locker rooms and bathrooms. And perverse men who have a radical agenda have no right to invade those spaces.
Well, I don't speak on behalf of all women, and I'm sure you don't speak on behalf of all women either, but I do find it interesting that men are the ones that need to speak up about this and not women. I mean, the membership of the Daughters of American Revolution are not all traditional. Carol Burnett, Bo Derek, who's a socialist and supported Bernie Sanders, Senator Tammy Duckworth, Rosalind Carter, the late Rosalind Carter, all members.
The people who tend to go to these groups tend to be a little bit more conservative, a little bit more traditional. I don't know. There's no poll of what percentage of the members support this or oppose this. And I guess that's really the problem. That's what the DAR members are complaining about, that this has been railroaded through, criticism has been suppressed, and the members have been instructed not even to speak to the media about it. So something tells me if the pro-trans side really had the majority of members, they wouldn't need to ram this policy through over the objections of so many.
And I'm quite troubled, Michael, by the leadership's assertion that this could be something to do with legal discrimination suits or things like that, because as you mentioned, this is a private organization, and hasn't the Supreme Court already upheld the rights of private organizations to be sex-segregated spaces?
Sure. The problem, though, is that as our law develops, freedom of association, which was so important to the American founding and the Constitution, has slowly been eroded. So you've seen cases of men trying to join sororities, you've seen all sorts of lawsuits, and you've seen our jurisprudence weaken on these points. The Bostock decision, I think, is a pretty clear example of that. So, you know, as of now, yes, the sororities are still able to be women's only spaces. The DAR, for that matter, right now is still allowed to be a women's only space. But we don't know how long that will continue. I think that the left-wing activists here recognize that there are powerful political forces at their backs, and so they're just trying to push the envelope even further.
Certainly if they were using, you know, if it was legal mechanisms of Title IX redefinitions or Title whatever to force this change on a private organization, yeah, then I would certainly oppose that. It wouldn't surprise me if it one day comes to that. A private organization can, as you acknowledge, you know, choose their own member. I support that, right? If they wanted to include trans people, they could. It's, you know, it's not anybody's business necessarily, but we're allowed to complain about it and, you know, not feel that this is a positive development for the organization. You're certainly allowed to feel that way about it.
I feel it is a little bit my business. And I feel it's my business because we live in society, you know, and this is not just any organization. It's a civic organization, and it's one that is tied to American history and to the American tradition. And because, well, I'm a citizen who speaks the English language, and if we're going to redefine the word daughter, that actually does affect me. So what's so wrong about this at a really deep level, beyond questions of consent and the rights of nonprofit organizations to change their bylaws or whatever, what's really fundamentally wrong is that men can't be daughters. Men are sons and women are daughters. And so if the DAR were to expand its membership to include men, then it wouldn't really be more inclusive. It wouldn't be broader than it currently is. It would just cease to exist. There would no longer be any such thing as the Daughters of the American Revolution. There would just be some new group, I guess. It's sort of like the Boy Scouts. When the Boy Scouts expand to include girls, they don't really expand. There just isn't any Boy Scouts anymore. And so I think the DAR is a great organization. I'm not saying this is the most important political group in America or anything like that, but it's a good organization that preserves some of our heritage and patriotic memory, and that's a good thing for the country, and I would hate to see it destroyed. And I would especially hate to see it destroyed by some activists in the street or by some leaders who have been kowtowed by the activists, especially if that's over the objection of so many of the members who are being silenced.
Well, it is interesting that you, a man, are taking this cause on behalf of all of the women members of DAR. But just like the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts, the DAR and the Sons of the American Revolution have different duties and different goals. And so maybe, that's another thing to look into is a few years ago, DAR didn't allow African-American women, even those who did have a legacy, genealogical legacy that went back to the Revolution. Again, I would be very curious to see how many people in the DAR opposed to this, because it has a diverse membership. Carol Burnett, as I said, Bo Derek, Tammy Duckworth, Rosalind Carter, some of the more notable ones, who have a very progressive perspective on a lot of these issues. But again, why isn't it the women inside that are talking about this? Why does it have to be you on the outside speaking on behalf of this large organization of women with a diverse set of ideas?
Because the leadership told them they can't speak to anyone about it.
So
that's
your
why
job
they reached
now?
out to me.
So it's your
There was
job.
multiple members who did it. You mentioned that a few years ago, the DAR didn't let black women in. It was more than a few years ago. The DAR has accepted black members for quite a long time, as America's relationship with race has developed. And even to mention certain high-profile left-wing celebrities who could be members of DAR, I do think it's a little misleading. You sometimes see this with another American genealogical society, the Mayflower Society. You notice I have Mayflower cigars here. That's a group that I'm a member of, too. And there are all sorts of people who can claim membership in the group, or perhaps whose families have been involved, but they are not actively involved. So, I think also people who can claim direct descent from the American Revolution patriots is a huge number of people. But those who are actively involved in preserving this legacy, it's a much smaller group of people. And I can speak with experience. These are groups that tend to be a little bit more conservative. And when we're talking about an issue like transgenderism, by the way, we're talking about an issue that was not really supported by anyone even 7 or 8 years ago. The very notion of transgenderism as a matter of public life really only reached the scene toward the middle and end of the Obama administration. If you asked a Democrat in 2011 what he thought of transgender rights, he would have looked at you like you had 3 heads, much less a Republican. Don't forget, in 2011, Barack Obama believed marriage was a sacred union between a man and a woman. So this is a radical social change that has received a ton of pushback. This issue is so lively with even ordinary American people, much less, conservatives of a certain age, that it flipped Virginia red. Glenn Youngkin won his election largely on that issue. Ron DeSantis won re-election largely on that issue. I don't think it's really all that controversial that women should be allowed to have their own clubs and men don't belong in there. It's controversial among the chattering class, among the political elite, but among ordinary Americans, and especially those interested in genetics, biology, history, and tradition. This is not a difficult issue.
And I would say, Michael, I appreciate you using your platform for this, because if we learned anything from the Riley Gaines case with Leah Thomas, the women who were on the swim team with Leah Thomas were told that if they didn't want to change in the locker room with him, that they were the ones that had to go somewhere else. He wasn't given a separate locker room. The women had to go somewhere else. And if they spoke out, they were at risk of losing their spot on the team or being referred to some kind of university organization that would tell them why they were being bigots. And so sometimes it does take people with a platform or people with a louder voice who are able to stand up for people who feel like they're not allowed to say anything, or if they do, they're going to face some kind of consequence that is higher than their ability to actually reach the public with the issues that they're facing.
I'm pleased to hear you say that, Amber, and I certainly would like to help in any way that I can. The Daughters of the American Revolution are tough gals, and they come from very strong stock, so, they're fighting a good fight. But I think it's important. If you believe that men and women really are different, then men ought to stand up for women. This also would not have been controversial more than just about 5 minutes ago, but it is important, and so it's not just that women, and this is obviously a much larger issue than the DAR. This involves sports, it involves schools, it involves bathrooms and locker rooms, all aspects of society. It really shouldn't just be up to the women to try to protect themselves against the predations of perverse men who are violating their spaces. Men need to stand up on this issue, and we need to speak the truth, and we speak the truth in love and in charity, but you got to speak the truth, and we ought to protect women. That was a traditional role for men, and we shouldn't abandon that, or frankly, we've adopted the transgender ideology ourselves.
Well, I can't wait wait for you to join the fight in supporting women's health across the country, since you want to stand for women and supporting our right to choose and are supporting our body autonomy.
I strongly support women's health, absolutely.
Michael Knowles, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Make America Healthy Again. That is, of course, the slogan coined by former independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. that many have seized for their own purposes, including maybe Joe Rogan. The podcast mogul highlighted the movement on an episode of his show this week. Let's watch.
Well, that's one of the things that people are so excited about with this Trump union with Tulsi Gabbard and Robert Kennedy, is that you're having these movements that seem to be almost impossible to achieve outside of an outsider, like the Make America Healthy Again concept. Like, what are you talking about? You're going to go up against these companies that have been donating to these political parties forever and have allowed them to have these regulations that are allowing them to have these dyes in food that's illegal in our neighboring Canada? Like, what? This is no one's done that before, right? So that's very exciting.
RFK Jr. continues to harp on the importance of children's health and safety. Here he is in a video from this week.
When it's the government that approves the poisons in our food, a few people get very, very rich, and the toxins end up in every supermarket aisle. Let me show you what I mean. Doritos, Cheez-Its, Cap'n Crunch, gummy bears. Everyone knows that these are junk foods, so maybe you wouldn't be too surprised to see that the ingredients include a lot of poisons, including a harmful yellow dye called tetrazine, or yellow dye number 5. What you may not know is that this dye was originally made out of the sludge that's left over when you turn coal into Coke. It's not all dark. Over the past 16 years, the government has banned 8 chemical additives that cause cancer, genetic damage, asthma, and many of the other health conditions, as tartrazine does. And you know what's interesting? All 8 of those crucial steps forward in our kids' health were taken under President Trump. But the Democrats, who claim to be all about health care, have stood by watching other countries ban these poisons and make our kids sick, asthmatic, hyperactive, and depressed.
So this is a major thing that RFK Jr. has obviously been pushing for a long time, that he's hoping Trump takes up, as that he's now endorsed Donald Trump and is behind him. And there were conversations this week about how to make us a healthier society. And I'm often struck by how much more serious obesity there is in America versus so many other countries. Many of us have had at least the anecdotal experience of like traveling to Europe or something and feeling like you're on vacation and really like splurging on all the food they have there and not gaining any weight because it just seems there's something healthier about it. And maybe that's not scientific at all, and I hate bringing that up, but so many people have said that. But then you do compare the ingredients in the foods and you find out that maybe there is something wrong with how we're doing it in America.
Well, the EU bans a lot of these chemicals, so that's part of it. I just find it comical that RFK is joining the Trump administration that wants to eliminate and has cut back on the Clean Water Act in a deal with oil and gas. Clean water, I mean, right now, as the Biden administration has released in many reports, there's so much plastic. It's in everything. Like, we have plastic in our brain. That's what's been coming out. And RFK decides to go to the Trump campaign. This is the guy who is eating taco, whatever that was, and has the worst diet in the world, does not care about any sort of obesity issues. In fact, he's taking money from pharmaceutical companies that are making money off of obesity in this country. I just find it comical that he is playing this game, as he did in the environment, and Riverkeeper came out against him saying, you were playing games with us and using us to push your own agenda, when in fact he wasn't actually helping fully in part of the Riverkeeper alliance and moving against them and cutting deals behind closed doors. That's what he's doing with this too. It's all a political ploy. That's it.
Well, RFK has acknowledged that he doesn't agree with Trump on everything, and I'm sure we could have an entirely separate debate on the merits or lack thereof of the Clean Water Act. Robbie, I know that probably hits you pretty hard, but
yeah.
He couldn't even get a meeting with the Kamala Harris campaign or with the Biden administration. So is he going to align with a political candidate who at least has acknowledged that these problems are real and is interested in trying to tackle some of them? Or is he going to align with the one that wouldn't even pick up a phone call? I mean, that choice seems pretty obvious to me.
I think RFK was feeling opportunistic. I don't think it's because he doesn't think the Biden-Harris administration have been serious about these issues. I mean, they don't take all this money from oil and gas who are polluting our environment.
Well, but isn't he right to behave opportunistically? I mean, it's very difficult for independent and third-party candidates in this country because of our system just relentlessly encourages the two-party duopoly. They're very interested in working to keep it that way. You can't, unlike other systems where if you get, 1% or 5% or 10% of the vote, that translates to some minority position or stake in the government, some level of influence. In our winner-take-all system, it doesn't work like that. You have to get the majority of the vote, or you might as well have not even bothered. And so the only way for an independent or third-party candidate to translate their level of support, and he had 5, 10, 15% support at one point. That's significant. That's not nothing at all. The only way to leverage that into getting something you want, perhaps it is to join with a campaign. And, to Amber's point, the Democrats are totally uninterested now in having this figure who was once a Democrat, who was once in good standing with his party, whose environmental and energy record, and then whose heterodox opinions on vaccines was welcome in the Democratic Party. It's not now.
His vaccine, no, it was not welcome in the Democratic Party. He was just the quirky Democrat who had his own theories and was running around with Hollywood celebrities trying to influence them. This guy just wants power. He wants influence, and he wants protection.
Well, I mean, so do Donald. I agree, but so do Donald Trump and Kamala Harris.
Well, and the question is, does he want power for his own sake, or does he want to be part of administration so that if this is an issue he's really passionate about, he can try to affect change on it? And I don't think any of us have some special insight into his motivations or his internal reasoning for why he wants to do this.
I think there's a history now, and enough people on the record and reporting over the past few years, of his using movements as an opportunistic gain so that he can move up in power in society and ranking and following whatever. Like I said, Riverkeeper, been a lot of reporting on that everybody at Riverkeeper realized that he was using them to cut deals behind closed doors with Barry Diller, his friend, in pushing his own agenda, and it went against Riverkeeper's agenda. So,
I don't doubt we've interviewed him on the show. He is very knowledgeable about a lot of health and energy and environment related issues. So I don't doubt his genuine interest in solving these problems. Now, I don't agree with necessarily a lot of his solutions, actually. And for instance, on this one, I worry that what if the FDA does strictly regulate a lot of things. The FDA making it harder to approve food and medicine products would end up making them, I would worry, much more expensive at this time where one of the top concerns of Americans is the cost of grocery store items, and having like a stricter regulation process would exacerbate that. Now, maybe it's incumbent on Americans to just demand or expect healthier products from companies, because there is a personal responsibility issue here. And he was talking earlier this week, RFK Jr. was, about, instead of the cost of Ozempic or whatever, you could give like a gym membership to everyone in America. Well, that's not going to work because because it's on people, right, to make healthier choices for themselves. You can't. Maybe it goes to a philosophical thing, but I don't think a more paternalistic government is going to fix the health problems of Americans to some degree. To
an extent. I would say on the FDA question, one point he brings up that is, I think, quite powerful is that there is an inherent conflict of interest in the fact that about 50% of the FDA's budget comes from pharmaceutical companies, right? I mean, they are a revolving door for people who are either in the bureaucratic system of the FDA approving drugs and then going to work for a drug company and making, a huge hefty salary off of the fact that they were in the FDA doing them favors. That's a huge problem. We shouldn't have that kind of conflict of interest between government and private interests in that way. And then on the question of SSRIs, he's one of the only individuals who's been running for political office that I can remember in my lifetime who has talked about the fact that the overprescription of SSRIs and anxiety medication can actually increase the incidence of depression and anxiety, particularly in young people. And so in that case, I would want more government regulation of those products because doctors right now are handing these things out like candy. I think it's something, the New York Times did an investigation on the percentage of young women who are on some form of antidepressant or anti-anxiety medication, and it's a stunningly high number. It's like almost 25%, I think. It's unbelievable. I'm glad he's talking about it. Even if we don't always agree on the solutions, it is clear that American health has gone in a very dark place over the past 20 years, and I'm glad somebody is at least giving voice to these issues.
Donald Trump's going to cut that budget, so good luck getting that done.
More Rising right after this.
Independent journalist Ken Klippenstein was suspended from X Thursday after publishing a Substack on the JD Vance Dossier, the cache of documents about the Ohio senator that were allegedly obtained in an Iranian hack on former President Trump's campaign. Klippenstein released the 271-page report that the Trump team put together to vet his now running mate, and despite having access to the stolen material, media outlets sat on it, keeping it from the public.
According to The Hill, a spokesperson from X said Klippenstein has been temporarily suspended because he violated the platform's rules, sharing personal information, including Vance's addresses and the majority of his social security number.
Klippenstein wasn't the only one put on pause on the platform. Ken's FOIA attorney, Beth Borden, was locked out of her account as well. She took to X, posting, quote, "Mr. Free Speech Musk locked my account and banned Ken's over an article about JD Vance that Ken wrote. To unlock, I have to delete the post. I think we all need to ask Elon to unban Ken's account." Others also came out in defense of Ken. National security journalist Seth Hetna wrote, quote, "Ken Klippenstein published the hacked JD Vance dossier and is immediately suspended by Twitter X for publishing private information. I'm old enough to remember when free speech zealot Elon Musk was outraged by Twitter's censorship." And Kyle Kulinski chimed in saying, "Everybody who screamed about the Hunter Biden laptop story being censored on social media is flipping out over the Ken Klippenstein ban, right?" Joining us now to give his take on him being suspended and why he published the dossier is Ken Klippenstein himself. Welcome back to Rising.
Hey guys, good to be back.
Yeah, great to speak with you. And I think the comparison to the Hunter Biden laptop story is one that's very fair to make. That's obviously something that infuriated many people at the time, that this really dramatic action was taken to limit what turned out to be a legitimate investigative piece about Hunter Biden. Now, you have published this dossier that other media outlets had declined to publish, and then you were immediately taken down on X. Tell us what kind of communications you've had from X. Have they drawn some distinction or said that you can post it, but just not the social security numbers, all of that kind of thing? Update us on what you've heard from the platform.
Yeah. So first of all, I just want to say our motive in publishing at all, because people will probably want to know why we made a decision different from the New York Times, the Washington Post, Politico, and all of these legacy media institutions, who I think were doing the worst of what I call media paternalism, or like trust us media, which is to say, oh, we know best, we know what the public is going to be interested in, and we can even paraphrase these documents for you because we know so well what you're going to want to know about them, or what's not going to be newsworthy. So to your specific question of what was cited for the suspension, I immediately got an email from Twitter citing, and this is interesting, two stories or two posts that I had done. One post was linking, of course, to the JD Vance dossier, but the second one was just a post I had linking to a story criticizing what I think is a hysterical response on the part of the federal government to foreign influence operations. Not that those foreign influence operations don't happen, not that I don't think the DOJ isn't right to prosecute cases of that, but to go and say that they're going to swing an election or have a determinative result on either side. You have Hillary Clinton supporters after 2016 saying the Russians gave Trump the election, and you had fears in 2020 of interference. I mean, to say that these frankly kind of Bush League memes and things that you see these nation states do, or financing a YouTube channel or whatever, is going to have enough is going to have an effect beyond the billions of dollars that are poured into elections now to try to move the needle like a fraction of a percent, is just absurd. So that was what the second story that was cited for my suspension was just a critique of the, I think, moral panic, overreaction to foreign interference. And there was nothing that could be said to be private in that document. So I don't know what that was about. In the first document, the Vance dossier, there was something like 170 pages long. It included several references to properties that he either owns currently or owned in the past. And then I think it was like 3 or 4 digits of his social security. As we wrote the story, it was an intentional choice to leave those in. And the choice, which I realize I'm probably the minority here, but the choice was that if this whole story is going to be about a response to media paternalism, and how we don't believe that to the extent that it's possible that the media should be making these judgment calls about, oh yeah, this is legitimate, this is not legitimate. It seemed hypocritical and kind of phony, frankly, to to make an exception for that, especially for information which I want to stress is not actually private. You can buy any of that information. I can go on LexisNexis right now, literally in 5 seconds, pull all that up. As a reporter, corporations do it. The reason they had that address and the portion of the Social Security number is because that's how they got it. They buy it on the market because all of this is public. If Congress wants to do something about that and regulate it, they can. They haven't done so. So I don't think it's private, and that's why I published it.
Ken, you make a good point because when I didn't read the whole thing, but when I did a quick glance of the index, it seemed a lot like a traditional opposition research file. So right away I was thinking, of course the Democrats, when the Iranians handed it to them, were like, yeah, okay, thanks, we've got that. We already spent money on this. This is what we do in elections. And it was just a kind of a bizarre cultural misunderstanding probably by the Iranians in terms of what campaigns need. There was no hacked emails. There were no dirty secrets in there. Like you said, most of it was public information or stuff that a normal opposition research firm or person could be able to provide. With that being said, also opposition research files are handed to reporters all the time. And maybe they don't just dump the research file into the public, but they pull things from it and they'll sometimes verify it or take leads. And that's kind of dark and dirty too, because reporters should be reporting on things, not be handed stories like that. So do you think it was a way also for them to just show, give a tell that, hey, you know, we get this information already. This isn't necessarily something that was new for our viewers to see?
Well, one thing I want to stress is we don't know for certain that it's Iranians. Gun to my head, I would guess that it is. But if you look at the intelligence community's statements on what their intelligence shows, they describe malicious cyber hackers connected to Iran targeting the Trump administration. Makes sense. And so what I've reported on, it would make sense to be a part of that. But they provide no specifics as to which information was hacked, which news reports are based on hacked information. So we just don't know. And that's, I know that might sound like an abstract concern, but to give you an example, back in 2016, there was the Russian-backed election interference hacking the Clinton emails. But in addition to that, there was just some random Romanian national who went by the handle Guccifer who hacked Clinton's emails. And at the time, it was reasonably, assumed, I believed it, that, okay, that must be part of the Russian effort. Turns out just some random guy that didn't like Hillary Clinton, didn't like the foreign policy, did it. He just got out of jail last year, I think. And he's just literally just some working class random dude who happened to hack it. So what that says to me is, and in the reporting, I've been very careful to note this. Yes, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence to suggest it, but we just don't know. And the media is running ahead with it. And the reason that they do, I think, plays into this whole thing I've been talking about, which is, I think, a disproportionate reaction to the threat posed by foreign interference.
So in terms of whether or not X is being hypocritical or not and the comparisons to the Hunter Biden laptop, I do believe the Hunter Biden laptop story was banned because it was hacked material, which X then got rid of that policy from their terms of service, and this one is apparently banned because of the posting of private information. I wanted to push back a little bit on your assertion that the media shouldn't be deciding what is legitimate or illegitimate information for the public, because I would posit that as a journalist all the time you're deciding which stories are worth pursuing, which ones are worth publishing, whether or not the information is actually newsworthy based on who the subjects are. So where do you draw the line in terms of how deciding whether or not something is legitimate or illegitimate? Because I don't think that that's an unlimited principle as a journalist for any of us in this industry.
Well, if you go back to what I said initially, I said where possible, you should release as much as you can. And in the case of a document like this, I think the whole thing is public interest in the sense that, I couldn't find anything in it that, it's so interesting.
But are 4 digits of the Social Security number public interest?
4 numbers to just, as a principle, adhere to, that we're going to release what we have and not make I think that principle is important. Once you go down the road of, I'm going to determine what matters, what doesn't, you open the door. Okay, so to continue with that, there were also business addresses. Does that count as private? There were also associates' business addresses. Is that private? But is it relevant? There are addresses that appear in public finance records that you can find on Google right now. Is that public record? You either have a principle on this or you don't, because there's not a clear line. I don't know how to answer that question, which one of those is public or not. And so at a certain point, you have to just make, we had this in the form of WikiLeaks. We've had this in the form of mass disclosures in the past. which included the kinds of information you're describing and which media was happy to use, at some point, I think because of 2016, the norm shifted and that principle doesn't exist anymore. And I think it should.
Well, and then there's also the element of this is on a platform that has rules that now have Elon changed some of the rules when he acquired the platform, right? He wanted to get rid of this if it's hacked materials kind of thing to prevent a Hunter Biden laptop situation from occurring again. Now, I guess I don't know off the top of my head whether they've tweaked the sharing personal information kind of rule. So again, I want to be clear. Did they say that that's the part, or did they say it was hacked materials and you can't put it on there or anything of that nature? They just said it's these two posts that we don't like.
Yes, they said it was private information, and then they linked to a post that had no private information at all. Like, I mean, there's no way it could be said to have it. And so, I mean, I think that's a pretext because as, other people have pointed out, you could find the same types of information, addresses and things and partial social security numbers all over Twitter, and that hasn't been taken down. So why this one? Obviously, Elon is not going to come out and say, oh, the guy I endorsed and I'm giving money to and want to win the election and talk about that endlessly. We don't want this out there. He's not going to say that because it's so similar to the Hunter Biden case, except in that case, there were like nudes and all kinds of things that are like go far beyond the invasiveness of what was contained in this document. And so he's kind of in a bind because he doesn't want it out. And so they have to find some kind of pretext to do it, I think.
I mean, you could also just let it out because it's just not that scandalous for Vance or for any. It's just things that again Democrats already know about Vance.
Right. So there was this media consensus that trust us, there's nothing. I call it trust us journalism. Trust us, there's nothing newsworthy in this. It's a kind of a nothing burger, whatever. You go through it. It was hard for me to find anything that wasn't newsworthy in it. I mean, it provides insight. It's the meta text. It's the significance of why they decided to include these things that gives you insight into tensions within the campaign, what they think his vulnerabilities are. That's really interesting. And what they listed was a lot of stuff that was kind of characteristic Trump sort of populism, opposition to support for foreign intervention, that kind of thing. And to list that as a negative, that's interesting in itself, right? And it shows that there's a split within the party.
Yeah, real quick question on that before we go. Were you able to ascertain who actually compiled the document? Because I know sometimes campaigns use outside vendors to do these vulnerability studies and opposition research. I wonder if it was an outside organization that determined that those were vulnerabilities rather than the Trump campaign itself.
Yeah, I think it has the name of the firm at the top, but I can't remember for sure. Unfortunately, it escapes my memory.
And I just want to ask one follow-up because it's fascinating to me that you got a response from Twitter. Did they email you directly or did you contact them? Because I had a story that they took down one time and I couldn't get anywhere. So I'm just curious personally, how do you do it?
No, I was suspended. They emailed me those two stories that I was describing before, and that was it. And it's been reported that it was temporary. It's not. I mean, when I go and I log in, it says you are permanently in read-only mode, meaning I can't post, I can't interact or anything.
I want that.
So what their public affairs said was just not true. They said it was temporary, and that produces a lot of good press for them because then they don't have to answer the charges of hypocrisy in its most serious form, which is someone ejected from the platform forever. And so everyone's like, oh, it's temporary, what's the big deal? It's not true. I mean, I'll post this shortly, but the message is I'm permanently unable to use the platform.
A colleague of mine at Reason tweeted a screenshot from the dossier from your post that did not include any of the social security number or whatever, and he got locked out of his account too. So there is something going on here that I think the platform, if it is committed to free speech the way it claims, really should try to explain much more clearly and restore people who are, sharing information that they did not obtain illicitly, that they believe is in the public information. Ken, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Claudia Conway, Kellyanne Conway's daughter, blasted Donald Trump during an appearance on her mother's program on Fox News Nation. Let's watch.
The way that Donald Trump is talking about abortion, a highly contested issue with my generation. He's saying that people are executing babies after they're born, or that women are having abortions in the 9th month. No, they're not. Nobody's doing that. That's not a thing. Young people, tens of millions of people tuned into the debate, and a lot of young people. I know all of my friends were watching, friends who aren't involved in politics, who don't know much, they were watching. And they see our former president, use this aggressive jargon, and also our vice president, this kind of back and forth way of speaking, which is like hateful and nasty. And people are tired of it. People are tired of it. My generation is tired of it.
Mom Kellyanne, a former advisor to President Donald Trump, pushed back on her daughter in terms of Kamala Harris's likability with younger voters. Here's what Claudia had to say in response.
I'm not here to, venerate any political candidate.
It's a good word.
But we are looking at this as kind of like, okay, she's pivoting a little bit from Biden's policies, and she can, counteract Trump's policies. And the way that she presented herself in the debate kind of solidified people's support of her. And I look at Kamala Harris and I don't see a perfect person. I don't see a perfect leader, but I do see change. I do see moving forward, and I'm not one for identity politics, but it would be nice to have a woman in the White House.
I'm glad to see them getting along, I guess, because this was a rocky family situation. Kellyanne's former husband, father to Claudia, George Conway, is this avowed never Trump figure. Kellyanne was obviously a member of the Trump team. It was very bitter and divisive and acrimonious and spilled out onto social media with Claudia, who was I think she's 19 now. She was underage at the time. She was very young. Seemed like it was a traumatizing thing, just not a good family situation or thing for a young person to have parents who were high profile, very against each other, and then she was kind of getting pulled into it, and it was just all very messy and ugly, and I felt I didn't want to be involved or have this level of knowledge of any family's interpersonal drama. So I'm glad to see they're chatting.
She was emancipated too. I mean, the whole thing was wild. I didn't think it was real for a bit. I thought it was just an act between Kellyanne and George Conway online, and they were going to have.
You almost had to think it was that, but it was.
I really
sincere.
did. I thought it was like
Carville and Madeline.
Exactly, and then it went totally off the rails. Like her live streams when her mom stole the phone. I mean, they needed a reality show if it weren't so tragic. It was. So I'm glad that
it was hard to watch. A couple of years after all of this went down, Claudia Conway actually appeared on American Idol. She auditioned, and Kellyanne was there for the audition. So they had apparently reconciled at that point. Unfortunately, she didn't make it very far in the show, but now I'm told by some reliable sources that Kellyanne might be trying to angle to get Claudia some kind of job, whether at Fox or in broadcast media more generally. There were a couple things she said during her comments that weren't quite right. I mean, she says that nobody gets third trimester abortions, and that admits that actually a small percentage do. And when Trump is talking about executing babies after birth, he's using a euphemism for failing to provide care to babies who survive abortions, which sadly does happen. I've interviewed an abortion survivor before who was, her mother had a chemical abortion. She ended up surviving, and they had basically thrown her in a closet so they couldn't hear her crying as she died. And a nurse just got this overwhelming sense of moral clarity and decided to save the baby. Democrats have voted every single time against the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Act, which would require doctors to provide care to those children. And in Virginia, there was this infamous clip that Trump referenced during the debate where Governor Ralph Northam was talking about this bill sponsored by Delegate Kathy Tran, and described how basically the doctor would keep the baby comfortable while a conversation ensued between the mom and doctor, insinuating that they would get to decide whether that baby lived or died.
That's all moving, and there are, I'm sure, unique cases, but there are plenty of cases where women are not able to access abortion in life-threatening situations, as life-threatening as an ectopic pregnancy, where they're bleeding out in the driveways, as we've heard. I know people personally who've had to go to a different state and then on the way had a medical emergency because they weren't able to access just normal health care. We're not even talking about abortion, something that would save their life. And, in some instances, even their baby's life, because they have to commit a certain type of surgery that is now falls under a form of abortion. So women's health in this country is completely underfunded. It's not researched, and the Republican Party platform is essentially cutting all women's health, not just abortion health, and that's a political motivation. And you know what? If Conway has a voice on Fox News saying things, pushing back against her mother, I think that's the best survey you could have.
I found it interesting that she didn't really want to say anything so supportive of Kamala Harris. She was just saying, I don't like Trump, but then she was not saying, but I'm so enthusiastic about Kamala Harris, because we've been we've been given this idea lately by the mainstream media that Kamala Harris is just so obviously popular with all young people, and I've wondered to the extent that is manufactured because, this is not someone like Barack Obama, who clearly did have this massive, genuine, grassroots, ground-up popularity with young people, with college students, et cetera. I have no doubt that Kamala Harris is more popular with young people than Joe Biden was or than Donald Trump is, but these are low bars to clear.
And I think that's what it is. I think when she was swapped in as the candidate, it was like, oh, great, we don't have to vote for Joe Biden anymore. We don't have to vote for the 80-something-year-old who is often stumbling on the public stage. And just to address your point about women bleeding out, dying, DNCs are covered under every pro-life law across the country. There's not a single state that outlaws getting removal of fetal tissue during a miscarriage. That's a misconception.
But the problem is that the doctors feel that they are under attack right now, that if they were, they're going to lose their license or be arrested. It's the fact that the other laws are usurping that law and putting the doctors' livelihoods and lives, frankly, at risk of saving women. And that's just, fundamentally, it's bad policy.
I have 2 points on that, because in Texas in particular, where there was this radio host that came out and claimed that his wife wasn't able to get a DNC for her miscarriage, it explicitly says in the pro-life law that was recently written after the overturning of Roe v. Wade that is an exception, that women are allowed to get all miscarriage care. And so I think when doctors are saying this, there's 3 things that are happening. One, they're being persuaded into a false conception based on media coverage or commentary, such as the commentary you're giving right now, into thinking that there is confusion under the law about what health care you're allowed to provide to women. 2, they're doing it for political purposes, which should strip them of their license if they truly withhold care from women to make a political point.
I don't think that's what they're doing.
I hope not. Or 3, they're legitimately confused, and if they are legitimately confused, then they probably shouldn't be doctors either, because again, the laws are incredibly clear. There should be no confusion between a spontaneous abortion, which refers to a miscarriage, and an intentional abortion, and any doctor who would refuse to provide women with care to remove fetal tissue during a miscarriage, again, shouldn't be practicing medicine.
Well, we shouldn't have any of these laws in the books, because this is what's making it so hard for doctors to be able to do their basic tasks. I think it's punishing women at all levels, and we know what the agenda is. Project 2025 makes it incredibly clear what the agenda is of the broader Republican Party, and we're sitting here talking about the weeds of really bad laws. And if it were up to most women, and that's statistical, they would not be following the laws that are being passed in these states that are punishing women from the basic levels of accessing health care and shutting down health care clinics for everything, a breast exam, to other types of support, to abortion laws that are incredibly, restrictive. And 6 weeks is very normal. That's standard. A lot of women don't even know that they're pregnant after 6 weeks. We know how cycles work, because it doesn't count from your first period. It counts from when you had your last period, which is often before intercourse begins. So these are restrictive laws, they're inhumane, and it's really about a greater goal, which is to defund all women's health.
Well, there's a lot of consensus, so some level of consensus, that 6 weeks would be way too early to have a ban, I think, right? Yeah. That's losing when it's been introduced at the state levels. I just, as a literally in between you guys on this issue, as a kind of moderate, I would leave it, to the states to decide as the law permits now, and the pro-life advocates have to, make their argument if they're going to win.
No, I totally agree.
Far, it's things that are that restrictive have not won. I would be fine with somewhere in the 12, 14, 15 weeks with exceptions going forward, and I think that's where probably most Americans are. But that should be, demonstrated state by state, and I think that would be the way to settle this issue.
Conway, great talk show. I would love to see that every week.
Yeah, well, you can see it on Fox Nation. I don't know if they're going to do a mother-daughter set, or maybe bring in the ex-husband, the father at one point. I would watch that. Okay, that does it for us this week on Rising. Thank you so much for tuning in, and please let us know if you liked the 3-person setup. Haven't done that in a while, but some of the old me, Ryan, Kim content was the highest quality in my view. So hopefully this was as well. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you can find podcasts, and we'll see you next week.